Alright, so what's up guys? Today's tutorial is going to be about frame rates. So if you're here for that, be sure to subscribe and look out for more awesome tutorials. So what are frame rates? Frame rates are typically referred to as FPS, which means frames per second, which basically means the amount of images that are present in 1 second of video. So typically what we're used to seeing in most TV slash film commercials or just modern display, we're used to seeing 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. Those are the typical frame rates that you'd see, which would give us a standardized look. You'd more so see 30 frames per second in like news and like live TV, and reality series and stuff like that. But for 24 frames per second, you usually see that in cinematic pieces, films, TV shows, but stuff that's less real life and more cinematic. You also have what you call high frame rates, which are basically anything that would be above 30 frames per second. So you can have 60 frames per second, you can have, I know some cameras shoot 96 frames, I know some shoot 120, and even higher. But basically anything that's over 30 frames per second, I consider that to be a high frame rate. Now, the benefit of using a high frame rate is that you have the ability to slow down or to reduce the speed of your footage and thus give you slow motion. So the reason why you're able to do this is because the number of images that are present are higher, and as such you can slow it down to 24 frames per second or 30 frames, and that would thus cause your image to go at a slower pace. There are pros and cons of using either high frames per second or the regular 24 frames per second. The benefit of using 24 frames per second is that your footage looks cinematic by nature. That's just what we're used to seeing. The other benefit of using 24 frames per second is that usually for most cameras, the highest quality that you're able to shoot would be at 24 frames per second. I personally use a Sony A6500, and at 24 frames per second, I'm able to shoot 4K UHD, which is basically a really high quality format that gives me super sharp and crisp images. I'm also able to shoot 120 frames on my Sony A6500, but only at 1080 HD, and the 120 frames tends to be a bit creamier and not as sharp. Now, personally, each frame rate has a place because you can shoot an entire film at 24 frames per second, and you can also shoot an entire film at 120 frames per second. But ideally, you'd want to choose the best of both worlds. So you'd shoot at 24 frames when you know you have an intention of slowing down. Sorry, when you shoot at 24 frames when you know you have an intention of playing it as is, and you shoot at 120 frames if you have an intention of slowing down your footage. So if you guys like the tutorial and you'd like to see more, feel free to subscribe and comment if there's anything that you'd like to see or if there's anything that you think I missed out on. See you guys. Peace.